My guest today is Esteban Rossi-Hansberg. Esteban is a professor of economics at Princeton University. His research focuses on macroeconomics, the internal organization of firms and its impact on productivity, international trade, and urban and regional economics. Recently, he has been focusing on the geography of the pandemic and of climate change.
There should be less of that with the internet, and what we have seemed to, all those things are constant. The store is still around, all the rest still around, and it seems like, okay, I add a technology that allows people to talk across space, and like now, that should make big cities, superstar cities, less important. And what we see is, for the last
yes
decades,
and no. Yeah, there's clearly an argument about that, and I think to some extent it has made the size distribution or the fortunes of some of the intermediate cities perhaps better as a result of access to some of these technologies. But if you think, for example, about the big cities, we've certainly seen a concentration in big cities, and part of that concentration has been the result of skill becoming more important and interactions between skilled people and the agglomeration forces and externalities that come out of those interactions becoming more relevant, and so that has definitely emphasized and segregated people, and those people have gone to the bigger cities partly because of amenities, but partly also because that's where they can earn the highest wages, because that's where they can interact with others. And so those agglomeration effects in some sense are very large for individuals, particularly like the cognitive non-routine type of tasks that those individuals do. And the second aspect of that is that, we've seen in some sense firms move from technologies that had high variable cost and relatively low fixed cost to technologies that have very large fixed cost but low variable cost. And to the extent that that's true, those fixed costs, where are those fixed costs produced? Where are the designs happening? Where are the distribution networks managed, etc.? All of that is happening in these big cities where this talent is. And so as we move those costs, we emphasize big cities, we emphasize increasing returns in those fixed cities and the externalities that those imply. And so in some sense, when we see globalization, yes, we can reach further, but at the same time, we are more intensive in skill and we are more intensive in fixed costs, both of which have a big urban bias. So I think that in some sense has led to more concentration in cities and has created like these global hubs of knowledge in some sense that are like, I don't know, the New Yorks, the Londons, etc. of the world, right? So that are, big hubs.
So let me ask you a little bit more speculative then. What is COVID, or the fact that COVID has pushed all these new technologies? Now we're doing much more Zooming, we're doing more interaction online. It's kind of accelerated a lot of these changes. What is your sense of whether is it going to kind of reduce these trends that you've been describing for the last couple of decades? Or do you think that, look, these things, are here to stay, and okay, we have a little bump in the road, but big cities are the winners always, after all?
Right. Like, let me start by saying, like, highly speculative here, of course, but I think the evidence that we have in urban economics and all the studies of cities and systems of cities is that in general, systems of cities tend to be very resilient to shocks. So, cities are hit by shocks and they tend to come back, and the distribution of cities at the end of the day doesn't change that much as a result of those shocks, or doesn't seem to change as much as a result of the shocks. If you look at the evolution over time of the systems of cities in the United States, or in many countries in Europe, certainly in France, for example, it looks today very similar to what it looked 50 years ago. The distribution, of course, the overall size of some of the cities, etc., has changed, but the distribution itself, namely how much bigger is the biggest city than the second city and so on, is very similar, in fact, than what it used to be. And of course, today's economy is kind of different than the economies of the past. So cities have been very resilient to shocks. Now, the question is this time different or not? And I think there's a potential for it to be different, in particular because of these telecommuting type of technology. So we've obviously, these telecommuting technologies are not new. We've seen them, improve over time. And if you look at the data and you look at, say, before the whole COVID crisis or epidemic came, and you look at the telecommuting data, you see, an increase in the number of people that telecommute, but still at very low levels, right? I mean, we're talking 6%, 7% max, something like that, right? Mm-hmm. But rising, as you would expect from the technology getting a little bit better over time, or a lot better over time. So that's kind of the natural evolution of it. And so that's, of course, not going to change cities in a dramatic way. That kind of evolution of a little bit of a better technology is not going to change cities dramatically. Now, what happened with COVID is, of course, that we suddenly, we all went home, or a lot of us went home. And so what does that do in terms of, can that change the equilibrium? Can that change in a world in which there's multiple equilibria because, there's coordination effects on going to work versus not going to work? Does that mean that we change equilibrium? So let me be a little bit more explicit about that. Obviously, how much we get out of going to the office depends on who goes to the office, right? Mm-hmm. If we all go to the office and we all interact in the office, we get more out of the office. We learn from our coworkers. There's externalities that knowledge spillovers of what we talk about, how we interact, etc. in the office. That's why there's offices. And that's why, if you want to rent an office in the middle of Palo Alto or in the middle of Manhattan, it costs you so much money because it kind of pays to be there. There's some benefits of being in those locations. Now, but there's a big coordination component to that. If everyone goes to the office, it's great to go to the office. You get all these benefits and your employer gets all these benefits. The firm where you work gets all these benefits. But if no one goes to the office, it's not so good to go to the office because you have to commute, you have to pay all the commuting costs yourself, and then you go to the office and there's no one there, right? And so that's, of course, no good. And so So that's like a classic coordination problem. I want to go to the office if everyone goes. If no one goes, I don't want to go to the office. And so what did COVID do, or in particular the lockdowns associated with COVID do? Well, they send us home, right? So now we're all home, and so the question is, well, suppose now we lift everything and the vaccine comes and we're all in and the whole pandemic goes away, and now are we going to go back to the office? Well, if we're coordinated in the equilibrium not to go to the office, right, that's an equilibrium. We're going to stay there, right? And we're just going to stay at home and not go to the office. Why? Because I don't want to be the first mover and go to the office because I don't get anything out of going to the office if no one goes. So it's classic coordination problem. And the question is, can we solve that coordination problem and make everyone go to the office as, we had before the crisis? And I think it's not going to be that easy to do because there's, of course, kind of individual advantages of staying at home and telecommuting. Most people are saving, an hour on average, not having to go to work and back. And that hour is valuable. You stay with your family, etc. Of course, there's heterogeneity in the preference of going to the office or not. So there's all sorts of issues there. But the question is, if not going to the office is in fact an equilibrium, we might very well stay there, and in a way that unless firms and governments are proactive in moving us back to an equilibrium where we all go to the office, we're going to stay there. Now the question is, well, is that bad? Is there a problem? Well, maybe that's a great equilibrium. That's the modern world. We should all stay in the office and telecommute. Maybe that's great. But all the evidence that we have is that those interactions are valuable, and that if the economy doesn't get all those interactions, and to the extent that telecommuting doesn't exploit all those interactions and, you know, doesn't encourage those interactions, or at least the resulting interactions become less valuable, then the economy is going to suffer and productivity is going to suffer in the long run. So, and certainly cities are going to de-agglomerate as a result of that. So I think we still don't know. We still don't know if we're going to move to that other equilibrium, but most likely there's going to be some policy and some push from firms and potentially governments to bring people out of their homes again.